and welcome to the Sanctuary, a safe space to speak from the heart. I'm your host, Israel. My guest today is my friend, super talented artist, producer, marketing genius, guru person, Earl Donald. Thanks for coming to the Sanctuary today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Israel. I'm stoked to be here.
So let's just start with COVID, man. What things did you have planned before March 2020? Like, that's when it kind of started. What things did you have planned for 2020 that the shutdown, the very first shutdown, put a kibosh on?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest one for me, I think, right off the bat is last April, I was supposed to do a tour with a Vancouver-based artist called Texture and Light. And so we were going to go up and do kind of Southern Ontario, Quebec, do some dates to support a release that I put out in 2020 called Where You Know Yourself, or called A Lighter World, pardon me.
I was wondering, what are you talking about?
Yeah. We'll have to cut that. I'm going to start that over again. The main thing for me was, we were going to do these tour dates in Southern Ontario and Quebec for A Lighter World. And again, the other artist, Texture and Light, was also touring a new release. So so that was something that I was really excited about, and then that was in April, so that was like right kind of as things were getting intense. So it was sad to not be able to do that, and you know, especially play in some cities that were new for me, that I hadn't played before. So just I guess that missing being on the road, you know, and traveling, I guess.
Yeah, and like, but you know, once things were actually locked down, you like, we all knew this was it. This is what's going to happen. How did you adapt with that?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that it's been an interesting thing for me, because I think in the first couple of months, for like the same as everybody, it was a totally new landscape. You know, trying to figure out what can still be done, or how can you still like find some creativity, and so the first couple months were tough, but I mean, for me, like I've just found that, you know, through this, it's really made me think a lot about collaboration, and I think that it didn't really almost take me until this period where it's harder to collaborate with people and we're sort of limited to be around people. It really starts to make you see the value. You know, you're reminded of those things and how useful it is in, you know, in a space where it's difficult to do. So on my new single, Talk, maybe we'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, so that has some vocal collaborations and has some people that are on that. And I put that together like over emails, doing, you know, virtual recording sessions. So I think that I've found a way to channel this time and use it productively, but yeah, it's been a new landscape for sure to get used to.
Yeah, it's been so different, but like being like you do electronic music and stuff, and like you're pretty much already almost always doing your creativity on your computer. When you had to now switch to not being able to go to studios, seeing people in persons, what other things did you add to your skill set to start like recording with other people, not in person, but like wherever they might be?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that the biggest thing for me was just that getting used to like writing a song over email or doing it over video chat. You know, because if you're collaborating with somebody, usually, like, you know, you can get in the same room and hash out ideas. You know, you have that sort of constant be able to get input from people. But yeah, without that ability to get together, it's been tough. Like, I think that you're right. Like, as an electronic artist, I do a lot of the production in the computer as well, in the digital setting. So in that respect, I've probably been a little bit more blessed during this time. But as far as like specific new skills, I think that I've had to work on my eye contact. You know, keeping eye contact. That's a big one.
Okay,
show people that you're still interested.
Yeah. You know, because when you're in person, like, I don't have to look at you for you to know we are vibing.
Yeah. Exactly. But if you're on webcam and you're just kind of like the whole time, then, you know, it's like, it's not the same.
Exactly. Yeah, okay, eye contact. Well, that's it. That's one you don't really think of until you
Yeah.
actually have to use it. So you know what? When I first had you on the blackout, we just kind of met the day before you were there.
Mhm.
You were in Halifax for your grandmom's 100. Was it
It
100?
was, yeah, 100th,
Yeah,
yep.
and then between then you just dropped all these, like, first it was like Where You Know Yourself, which was before a lighter world.
Yeah, we know that one for sure now.
But like, Where You Know Yourself came up with Purgatory, Shadow Visions, Dreamscape Sacrifice. Shadow Visions was a song that just like blew my mind away. I freaking love that song. And then
Thanks,
I was
man.
like, okay, as an artist, right? When you're done with these projects, and it's like it's complete, it's done. Do you ever get those moments where you're like, shit, I have to do the next one?
Oh yeah, well, of course, man. Yeah, like I think that for me, it's the releases are very much like sort of like a snapshot of sort of like where I'm at as like a musician in that time, and so I think that let me say this. I think there's sort of two schools of thought when you do a second release. It's like you either try to recreate the magic that you had on that first one and try to make like, a second copy of that, or you take a total left turn and you're like, I'm a different person now, so the music or the art that I'm going to make is going to be different. And I guess you just hope that the people who like the first one sort of follow along in that progression. And I think that for me, I've always kind of ascribed to that second belief system, I guess, because because I think that we're all sort of, we're changing people. People are complicated. People go through different things in their life, and when they sit down to write a song, that's going to come out. And I think although that first camp might be more, the fans might like that more because if you love the record, you maybe want a second version of that. But I think that's difficult to do as an artist, and I think that sometimes when you have someone who tries to recreate the first one too much, it can feel like a little bit disingenuous, I think.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like it's important to kind of try to be like, hey, this is where I'm at right now. So if that means that the release is going to be a little bit poppier, or if it's going to be a little bit more dance music driven, I think you just got to go with that.
So I'm gonna take you back a little bit to Where You Know Yourself. We talked about it. We talked about the album cover, but I didn't talk about specific songs. Like, so I want to talk about Purgatory first. That's, I think, the first track anyway.
Yeah.
So Purgatory, like, what was the idea behind that, and like, at what point, because like how you make your songs is like you're just putting all these sounds together, and then it forms this like a soul, like a being, really. How do you know, okay, when it's done and you don't need to add anything anymore? And like, what's that entire process?
Oh, Israel, you're starting with the tough questions. Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. Like it is. Well, I guess I should start. Like, I'm a guitarist, first of all. So I played guitar in since I was 12 years old, and I've played in bands most of that time. So that's definitely where I got my kind of groundwork in writing songs and song structure and that type of thing. So when I started working on writing songs as a solo effort, definitely those previous experiences have helped, and especially with especially the song structure, so knowing like how to move from one part to another part. But yeah, I think that you nailed something that's really, really interesting, and is sort of is maybe defined differently by every solo artist. Is like, how do you know when it's done? How do you know when you've added enough? Because I think that any bedroom producer will tell you that it's really easy to start a song, but to finish the song is very difficult. And I think that a lot of again, bedroom producers or producers in general, especially when they're first getting started, inevitably will have 20 ideas or 20 started projects, but like very few of them actually get finished. And I think that for me, it's just sort of like you got to trust yourself, and I think that it's helpful that if you have like an idea or a concept of the release before yeah, at the initial stage. So it's like you kind of know that like when a song is sort of representing that idea, that the initial kind of nugget, let's say, that was supposed to define that record. You can kind of get like an internal check or balance, like when you say, oh, it was supposed to be this vibe, that vibe is now here. So it's yeah, it's I think it's different for every song almost, and I think for me, I mentioned this to you I think when we last spoke, but I definitely like to write songs that sort of take people on a journey, and that's definitely like the vibe I try to go for on all my songs. So I think once I got that sort of that vibe that sort of whines and winds you a little bit, then that's kind of how I know when it's getting into the right space.
And then, he kind of just flows straight into my track, Shadow Visions. Like, what was the idea behind Shadow Visions, though?
Yeah. Well, Shadow Visions is definitely one that's very near and dear. That was the very first Earl Donald song that I ever wrote. And that one, I just really kind of, for that one, like I wanted it to be based around like a very simple beat, like just so it's just like the chimes and then that pretty simple like drum beat. And then that was also sort of when I was really just learning about making, digital production and electronic music. So, like learning about pitching vocals, learning about building like interesting loops and stuff. So the hook on that song is actually I'm actually singing that, but I've just pitched it and like feminized it a little bit.
I didn't know that.
yeah. So that was actually, that whole song was a real trip, like a real journey for me, just like trying different like skills and elements. So that song, I think like almost more than a lot of them, just kind of has a special place for me.
Oh, okay. So it was your name. You spin it. It explains that when you're performing that song live, with your music box. I don't know. You told me the name, but I've forgotten it again. I call it music box.
Yeah.
When you're playing your music box, like, is that why you kind of like twist the thing? Is that like the pitching thing?
Well, it can be that, or like it's like open source is the wrong word, but basically you can like set it up however you want. So, you can put a pitch on there, or you could put a little bit of delay on there, or so it definitely, it's kind of like set up for the user to, experiment a little bit. And so, and so that's kind of useful for my music, because I think that I approach it half from the sort of DJ perspective and half from like the live electronic perspective. So having that ability to kind of like wheel and deal a little bit on the go and kind of change sounds and shift things a little bit like as you're going, it's kind of cool for me. And I like, especially when I play live, to kind of change things up a little bit. So it's like you have like a general set you play each night, but within that set, like you can do small things. So even though if you're playing the same sort of 10 to 12 song set every night, each set will be like a little bit unique.
I'm all about the album covers, and you did another, hit it out of the park with A Lighter World again. Where was that one? Like, what's the story behind the cover art for A Lighter World?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So appreciate that. So all the artists, all the album art is for the most part like pictures that I've taken on. I really love like those kind of like film cameras that you get from like the like 90s, like those kind of just like not scroll, but crank and shoot kind of ones. So a lot of the pictures that I use in my album art I've actually taken from when I was traveling. So the cover of A Lighter World I took when I was in Brazil a couple years ago, actually. And Brazil obviously has so many beautiful coastlines, and I went there with a couple really good friends. So that picture also like has a lot of fond memories for me. So that was just outside Rio on a beach, just kind of like on this rock face.
Looks dope. And then the first single for that one, Birds of Paradise. How do you even choose your first singles, though? Let's start with that before we talk about Birds of Paradise. It's a fine line, I think, because again, like I think that there's the traditional kind of like record label perspective, and then there's sort of like the artist perspective, because if you were signed to a record label, they'd be like,
okay, you know, these 2 songs out of the 10 are your hits, and then maybe you start with your strongest one, or purposely put your, you know, you do your first single probably your strongest one, your second one will be the second hit, and then you'll do like a year cycle where you know, tour those and put the singles out strategically within that year. And so I think that's a kind of like a business perspective where you try to like maximize each individual release and you get the most out of the album. But I think as like an artist, you know, it's you want to kind of still have some of that sort of direct intention, but also it's a product that you're quite attached to, you know, so it's like you have that emotional attachment and you want to share with people because, you know, you've spent time on it and, you know, you think it's probably the best thing that's out there, you know, right? So, you know, you can't wait to share with people and, you know, and ideally have them think the same. But so for me, though, I kind of try to approach it from kind of like a middle point where it's you want to choose a song that does stick out from the bunch, you know, whether that be through, you know, the production really sounding good or like the way that the vocals and the music like interact each other, just like really click. And so all those kinds of things that you think will make somebody want to listen to the song multiple times, you know, that those are good traits for a single. But yeah, choosing the first single I think is tough. And again, like it's definitely can be difficult to be objective about your own content. And so I think that,
Yes.
yeah, you know, I'll underline that one.
I made the best shit in the world.
Totally. And so I think that, again, honestly, like, I think it's important to have a few people that you trust and people who will give you like real feedback, you know. And I think that's one thing when you're in a band setting, you know, you have these other people to bounce ideas off of. You have people who are like, you know, no, that song's not so good, or that one really, really slaps. So, but then when you're a solo artist, you have to make all those decisions yourself. And you're also, you know, extra attached to the material because you're the one who put in all those hours. So I think for me, like I've got a few key kind of like other artists, people I know that I trust their opinion, so I can get feedback from them. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I think you just got to choose the song that really, like really symbolizes the point of the project, like the best. So then if a listener only ever listens to that one song, then they still probably walk away kind of getting the intention of the wider release.
Birds of Prey. So let's talk about Birds of Prey then. You know, you figured out, okay, of all these songs for this project, this is the one that's coming out first. What did it take to make Birds of Prey?
Yeah, so Birds of Paradise.
You know what? I've done that every time. Every time you cry. Birds of Paradise.
Yeah.
You know, I remember on the Off Kilter show, you also said the same thing. Birds of Paradise. Oh my God. God. I'm such a bad friend. Yes.
No, you're right. To be honest, you're not the only one. So maybe that should have been the name of the song. But yeah, so Birds of Paradise, that one was like, yeah, that one was an interesting experience because so some of the songs that I write, like I said, I'm a guitarist first, right? I still kind of think of that way. So some of the songs, especially the earlier songs, I wrote on guitar first and then kind of started layering them with synths, and then at some point you take the guitar out. So basically you kind of can, when you're building the structure of the song, you start with an element that you're the most familiar with, and that you kind of have you don't need to think about as much of like, how do I write this part? You're just like, how do I make this part strong? You know, so in the instrument or the tool that you're the most familiar with, in my opinion, is probably the best place to start. So for songs like Birds of Paradise, that definitely started as a guitar song first. And then you kind of like build like that initial kind of like keyboard part, like with the big kind of synth at the beginning. That was like the next thing that came after. And I find that like, this is especially true with Birds of Paradise, but for other songs, it's like, I find like it's, once you have like one really like strong element, then you know you have like a good song, I think. And that was like for me, like when I had that first kind of piano part in the beginning, like the big chords, it's like I was like, okay, this is gonna be something, like once you once you have that strong piece to go from, and then it's like once you kind of have that groove, then it's just sort of like, you can kind of keep that same groove for like the whole song, and I think that's actually good for the listener because they kind of like pick up on that element, and people like familiarity in songs, so it's like if you can kind of keep one nugget of that initial thing going throughout the song, then I think that's helpful for the listener. But yeah, with that one, it was kind of it was a cool experience, like especially like using the guitar and then switching over, and then on some of the new songs, I've started experimenting writing a different way where I kind of start with like a drum beat and then kind of go from there, as opposed to starting with guitar, and then that's kind of like leads to a different outcome.
Is that a little bit scary to do? I mean, since it's new.
Yeah, I think it is scary a little bit, and it's. I think that when we like what we were talking about before, like how do you know really when a song is done, or like how do you know when it's complicated enough? I think that becomes a lot more difficult to make that call when you're starting with an element that you're not quite as familiar with. So, for example, for me, like when I start with guitar and then you add and add and add, you're like, okay, well, I've covered. I have a bass part, I have a drum part, and then I have pretty much the fundamentals of a song. But if you start from a different angle, you're almost like, you think you would just be able to check the same boxes, but it feels different. So, but I found like, especially now in the last couple releases where I'm trying to switch to having like a more kind of like, let's say by the book kind of like dance music style. It's been helpful to start with the drums because then you know that you can kind of get that beat down. And if you're trying to make like a house song or like sort of like maybe a drum and bass kind of influence song, it's like for those genres, like the beat is so important. Like having that like 4/4 or like having that kind of break beat. Those are kind of quintessential parts of that define that genre, and that like when people who listen to that stuff, like if they don't hear that beat, then they maybe won't even pick up on the influence. So I think that when you're starting to intentionally write within a genre, you sort of need to follow a few of the standards.
Okay, and then that's Best of Paradise. But like my track on a lighter wall is Penthouse, right? It has this vibe. I don't know. It sounds summery. That's what I call it. What was the experience and like the process of making that one?
Yeah, well, Penthouse was cool actually. There's this band in Edmonton called Faith Crisis, and in Edmonton there's quite like a diverse like music community, and even though I'm based in Toronto, I am originally from Edmonton, so I definitely have a connection to like the Alberta scene and the capital region. I remember seeing them play, and they're kind of pretty noisy, pretty out there, but it kind of got me thinking that I was like almost like, what would this look like in the Earl Donald setting, like with just sort of like you kind of peel back the poppy elements and just kind of like focus on just like the sort of like raw kind of interaction of the beat and the synth. So that when I sat down to write that song, that was sort of like the intention I had in my mind, that I was like, I didn't really want this to be a straight ahead pop song or a straight ahead dance music song, but still like be influenced by some of those elements. And maybe this, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I always love that kind of 80s sound. So it's like those sort of, some of those kind of more retro kind of synth sounds like I love, and even like the really heavy like arpeggiators, and kind of gives it that sort of like rhythmic element. So I really wanted to kind of like play with that and make a song that was a little bit more out there. And I had a feeling that was also going to be the ender of the release, like the last song.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of like, go all in and be like, yeah, this is going to be like the closer. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I freaking love that one. Do you ever like when where yourself is done, and like you've played it, toured with it, and create this set around this project, and now you start working on a lighter world, do you at a point just like start listening to some kind of music to get like a new groove or rhythm for this new project?
Yeah, that's an interesting question actually, because I think that Well, I would say yeah, definitely. But I think for me, like I'm sort of always writing because I find like oftentimes even when I'm like working on finishing a release, like I'll have like an idea that I'm like, okay, this release is done, so this new idea is definitely not going there. It has to go over here, and so it's like, so I have like a lot of like kind of like partially finished projects or like ideas because lots of times like I find. You want to kind of put a lot of great ideas into one song and make the song as strong and as interesting as it possibly can. But sometimes you can almost have too many ideas, or you try an idea and you're like, this isn't working here, but it could probably work somewhere else. So I've definitely gotten in the habit of kind of, instead of ignoring those other ideas, like you maybe jump out of your project, jump with somebody else, lay it down, and then you'll come back to it maybe at some point in the future. So for me, like I'm always kind of just like working on the next thing. So oftentimes by the time, for both of the examples, like where you know yourself and A Lighter World, by the time the record was like finished and I was like playing those songs live and trying to create some hype around them, usually I already had like a couple of the songs that'll be on the next release already kind of like partially figured out, or at least like an idea of what that direction is gonna look like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like oftentimes, like by the time I'm finished record, I have a bit of an idea of like what the next one will look like, even if it won't come out, for 10 months or a year or something. Like, still got to put in the time to get it there. But yeah, usually it's more of like a progression. Like you finish one, and then usually also that opens up an interesting kind of place for the next one to go to, because since you've purposely left some ideas out of the current release. So on the next one, you're like, okay, maybe I'll explore some of those spaces that I, didn't really make room for.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then what are some songs you'd listen to just in general while working on this process?
Yeah, well, specific song, as far as like specific songs, I'd have to think about that, but like a couple artists like definitely stick out for me. The artist Destroyer from Vancouver has always been a really big influence on me. I can't quite remember the guy's name. It's mostly one guy, but he has a band, and they make just really interesting kind of like indie sort of like folk influence music. And then on their new albums, it's like they have a lot more synth and it's a lot more electronic. But he's got a very interesting voice, and I definitely I kind of gravitate to artists that have like sort of a less, like a more unique singing voice, because I feel like I can kind of relate to that, and I like people who kind of really write songs for around their sort of unique vocal. So he's definitely one Canadian artist that I definitely hold into pretty high esteem. There's a couple of London, UK artists, Real Lies and St. Jude, that I listen to quite a bit, and I find like both of those bands are quite influential on me, because they do kind of like that middle point between sort of like the indie dream pop and the dance music. Like they'll have like a house beat, but then they'll do kind of like indie vocals over top. So the kind of fusion of those two, and that's kind of like the space that I think that I live in as well, like sort of somewhere in between sort of like the indie and then sort of with the electronic undertones. So yeah, those guys are as well, like definitely check those guys out, and that's big influence. And then as far as like the electronic influence, definitely Burial, I think another London-based artist. He makes like straight up kind of he's very much like in the dubstep scene like back in the day, but it's like his stuff is like very kind of like ethereal, and even the records that are kind of old, like it's like I think 2006 or something, but still like you listen to them and just the soundscapes that he does are just like really, really amazing, and just like really lush synths, but then still with like the choppy kind of like dance music beats. So I kind of like those like people who sort of like straddle two genres, and they kind of like, it's not exactly one thing or another thing. It's like they're very much like, use elements that you're familiar with from other music, but then the way they put it together is quite unique. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get from your music, and that's why it's not stale, right? It's its own thing. It's like, that's why I'm saying you put all these things together and you form a soul. Like each song, it's just its own thing, and I really love that. And then let's talk about Golden Sunlight then, right?
Yeah.
What made you release that one? Is it also gonna be? Is it gonna be part of a new project coming up or?
Yeah. So I've my thinking has kind of evolved a little bit in the last, I guess, like pretty much since I put out A Lighter World, and I've done some reading online, and just I've been thinking more and more about like how people consume music these days, and what that sort of means for people who are both artists, but especially for underground artists who are, still kind of making a name and coming up. And I think that it's at some level, putting out a full album or putting out a lot of songs at once perhaps almost does you a disservice, because, you put in all this time to write this record, put in all this effort, and then you throw it up online and a month later it's old. And it doesn't matter if you spend a year recording it or 2 years recording it. Honestly, even if it's really great, you get that one single out there that really pumps it, but then you have like 9 other songs that are kind of like could be really good too. But, again, like even after an album 6 months old, like you can't even really submit it to college radio anymore because it's outside of that period, So I think that there's really, and people consume music so quickly these days, it's just like, it's such a consumption kind of market as far as like music or videos or the similar art forms. So I think that, on the one hand, you can be like, you know what, like that may be true, but I want to put out a record, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. And I think that, you can have whatever perspective you want, but I think that flexibility is always kind of like a smarter approach. So in this last year, especially with all this like craziness going on and, the inability to tour and just the sort of shifting environment, I've gotten kind of more on the perspective that perhaps it makes more sense to sort of put out like a single a month kind of thing. And then, you put time into like building hype around that one song. I have some videos in the works. So, there'll be some video content coming out, as well, like in the early part of the summer. So that's kind of like where my thinking's been at the last little while, is that sort of just like trying to do self-contained singles. And there definitely will be a release later this year, with all those songs together, and then I can kind of promote that as a larger piece, because I think there is still sort of a place for that. I'll bring up college radio again for submitting like a full release. A lot of people don't really want individual singles, or a similar place like that. But basically trying to like still acknowledge that there's something to be gained by putting out like a full release, but at the same time, like maybe there's also like something to be gained by doing it piecemeal and like focusing on individual singles as well.
Dope. I love Golden Sunlight. Again, it has that summer vibe.
Yeah.
But then the new single, Talk, right? I've listened to Earl Donald. You've never put anybody on your song, but this one had two people. Like when I first saw the song, I was like, I wasn't sure, and then I loved it. So first off, why did you decide to like feature artists? Because like I've always felt, right, in my head, one thing I've always felt like, Purgatory and Shadow Visions, I'm like, man, just get like someone to sing something on it, like, right? But and then you came with Talk, and then not only did you have someone sing on it, you also had someone rap on it. What was the idea behind that? Why did you decide to do Talk? I know you kind of touched on it a bit when we started talking today, but like, why?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's start like do the full gauntlet there. So definitely on the earlier releases, on Where You Know Yourself, it's like there's only one song with vocals. So when I first started the project initially, it was almost like none of the songs were going to have vocals, and it was going to be just like electronic music or just sort of synth-based music. So in the early Earl Donald days, that was kind of like the perspective. And it kind of was like fit with a lot of like the music I was listening to and a lot of like the electronic music I was into, where it's like not as vocal heavy. But then some of the songs, like especially Shadow Visions, I remember I wrote that beat and I was like, no, I gotta write something on this. And so I don't think that like it was ever like that I was against having features or anything, but I think that especially in the early stages, like the first record and then a little bit on the second record, like I think I wanted to take some time and be like just with myself and figure out what what it was, what I was trying to create, what was sort of what did Earl Donald mean, and then once I maybe had like a few kind of posts in the ground and a kind of like a stable kind of base, I'm like, okay, now what else is it? And yeah, and I think that especially this past year, like where like what I was kind of saying, where it's become so much more difficult to collaborate with people. And like I said, I come from a band background, so it's like I definitely have a long history of like working with people and writing songs that way, and I love touring with people. Like you said, like I think there's definitely a lot of positives to working with people and having strong collaborators and having a strong network. And I think that especially the scene dynamic, I think that nobody comes up alone, and I think that nothing happens in a vacuum. So you're only going to have good things from having strong people around you. But that being said, yeah, I think on this year, it's just got me thinking a lot more about some of these things, and thinking and maybe on some level kind of missing that like band dynamic that I enjoyed for so many years. So yeah, basically with that kind of mind frame, when I started working on Talk, I was kind of thinking, I was like, it has like a bit of a slower kind of beat, and pardon me, BK Shakur, the MC that does the rap part, we've known each other for a very long time, and back in like the punk rock days when we were playing in bands like that. So we've known each other for a while, and we had talked about doing music together for some time. And so I was like, okay, so he's an MC, so I'll probably have to work with that a little bit. And then I wrote Talk, and I was like, I think this is the one. Gonna get him on it. And yeah, and it just honestly, it felt really great. Like, and the same with Oriana Aretha, like just in this year where it's kind of become so difficult and people are spending so much time alone at home, and just like not really seeing anybody, myself included. It just sort of seemed like a really kind of interesting, fun time to kind of really try to bridge that gap and find ways to still have communication with people, still try to create those connections. And I think that for me, that was almost like sort of like a liberating thing to do and keep my mind busy this last year, where you're spending so much time just kind of going crazy in your apartment. But yeah, so at least like even if you're again doing it over email, doing over voice or video chat, pardon me, yeah, it's still like it was cool to have that connection and to kind of like write with people.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think playing a song, it just came out the other day, so it's kind of great. It's getting his legs in. Played it. I love the feedback I got playing it on the Off Kilter show. So it's really it's again, that's the thing. It's like a different vibe, but it's uniquely Earl Donald too. So I like it. But I'm gonna let you go soon. But before I do, I wanna ask about how you get all your fucking songs licensed by MTV. What's happening there?
Yeah. Well, so there's a marketing or a music agency I work with called Tinderbox in Minnesota, and so I got put onto them quite a while ago by just a mutual contact. And yeah, so they do all kinds of stuff, like as far as licensing or as far as radio distribution or playlist kind of distribution as well. So yeah, so working with them, I can't really take too many props, to be honest, but yeah, so mostly working with them kind of have helped with that. And yeah, and I think that, it can be also daunting as like a new artist. Like, at what point do you do a press release? At what point do you, try to get real distribution? And I think people can be like, oh, well, I'm doing this as a hobby, or I only have a couple songs out, or I only have this. But unfortunately, like, the real hard truth is that, there's so many songs out there. So if you just throw it up on SoundCloud and hope that something's going to happen, it doesn't work like that. And, even if your songs are great, unfortunately, like, I think most of the time that's just not enough, So if you really want to get your songs out there, if you really want to have people listening to them, talking about them, and hopefully getting licensed, getting your songs in cool places, you got to sort of play the game.
Yeah. No, that is true. So, actually, I'm gonna let you go with this one though. Sure. You just mentioned something that most artists out there don't think of. So my question is like, at what point? No, 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 no. The question is like, so to an artist out there watching, listening to the show, at what point do you think they should like reach out to get some kind of representation?
Yeah, yeah. That's really tough. I think that I would say that I would say the simplest way that I would put it is that I think it's sort of like a personal decision that you're like, okay, I'm gonna now take this amount of seriousness, like, and I think that's really what it is it's like you got to ask yourself, why do you make art? Why do you make music? Why do you do anything, creatively? And if the answer is just to, stay busy outside of work or to share things with loved ones, then probably it's not as necessary. But if when you answer that question, you say, well, it's because I want to tour, I want to be able to, show this to as many people as possible. It's like, I want to chase this, and if not a main career, as like, as a part of my career, then pardon me, if the answer is more on that side, then there's follow-up questions. You're like, okay, well, if you want to take it more seriously, what does that mean? What do you need to have happen for you to be like, okay, now I'm taking it seriously, and at that point, maybe it's time to invest a little bit of money. But I think what I'll stress though is that it's like, there's 1,000,001 services out there that'll promise you the world and will deliver very little. So I think that you got to be really careful as well, and you got to be smart, and you got to read reviews, and you got to get recommendations from other artists who have done more than you have done, and see how they've done it. Like, honestly, I think that's the best way to do it, is you look at an artist that you're kind of like, hey, I want to even be, I'd like to be half of what that person's achieved, and if you can, a lot of people I think are happy to talk about it, because it's like, even artists that are sort of further along in their career, everybody had a first day, you know what I mean? Like, everybody was at one point in that same position as you. So I think people are happy to look back at that. And I think especially because it gives, it'll give them an opportunity to reflect and maybe give them a new perspective on the direction that they're heading in. And then also, as a beginner, you stand to learn so much, because again, like, there is a lot of predatory services out there, predatory companies that will be happy to take your money and tell you that your songs are amazing and tell you that you'll be this, that, and everything, and again, especially when you're so close to your music, I think that it's really easy to believe those types of statements. And then you start to kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy in a way where you're kind of like, oh, well, I think these songs are great, and now this other person is saying that they're great, so they must be great, and it's like, I'll do whatever they say, pay whatever fee. But I think that you got to keep it at arm's length and be objective, and be like, I think that realistically, if you don't really have that many followers on Spotify, or if you're in like still trying to build an Instagram page or something, it's like, maybe it's unrealistic if somebody says that they're gonna get your song on the best playlist, and then it'll have all these washover effects, and then you'll be opening for whoever. It's just like, it doesn't really happen like that, so it's like, I think, if somebody's saying that, then be realistic about where you're at, and I think that doesn't necessarily mean you can't ever get to that point. But I think that also goes kind of part and parcel with this idea of like making it, or like breaking through, or something, like whatever these like phrases that we always hear like actually mean, and I think that Killer Mike from Run the Jewels, I watched an interview with him, and he put it pretty good, and he was like, you have these artists that starting out, and all they want is fame, all they want is this and that, and I think that, but people don't really think enough about like, what is the level of fame that you even want? Like, what's the level of like attention that you even want? Like, not everybody can realistically like be on the road 8 months of the year touring. It's like, that would be in itself, like, it maybe sounds great in theory, but it's like, when you're actually there, like, how many people really want that lifestyle? So I think that a big part of all this stuff is to be, realistic and set tangible goals, and be like, what will be success to me, and not think about it in a sense of like breaking through or making it or something, because honestly, what does that mean? And if it's not a well-defined goal, then are you even going to be happy when you get there?
Man, Earl Donald, you're always dropping the knowledge. Thanks so much for coming to the sanctuary today. Actually, I kept saying before I let you go, I'll ask one question. But like, this is the real last one now, though. Now Talk is out. What are you working on, and when was something new coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm in the early stages of doing a video for Talk. So watch out for that one. That'll be coming this summer. And then I have some new tracks coming out. So actually some new collabs as well. So like I said, this has been a big year of collabs. So definitely got a new track coming out that has some cool stuff. And then later in the year, we'll definitely have a third release. So watch out for that. Earl Donald #3, late 2021.
Do you have a name for that one? Yeah.
There's a few names washing around. I'm gonna keep that one in the void though. So because it is still in the works. I find like the naming process for me is like a very step by step, because like when you write something, everything has like a working title. Like it'll be like, whatever, just something random. Like maybe you just see something in the room, you just name it that, and you're like, I'll come back to this later.
Okay.
So a lot of like working titles, and then like sort of like once you have all the songs like mastered and the artwork, and then you kind of sit down and you're like, okay, it's this, and I find once the project's done, it's like the name kind of just sort of seems obvious, because it's like you look at the sum of all the pieces, and then it's sort of it sort of tells you like that. So what, I'm not go ahead.
Is that the same with song titles or album titles?
Yeah, you brought up like something that again, I think there's two schools of thought on the album. I mean, on the song titles. Pardon me, is that like, so you can either name the song like a part of the refrain. Like if you say like a couple words or one word a lot in the song, then people will instinctively think that's the name of the song, even if you name it something else. So whatever that be. So you can kind of just like, I think, work with what people expect the name to be, or you can name it something kind of totally random that like, or I should say probably has deep meaning for you, but to the listener may seem random. And and I think that I was in that second camp for a long time, where I sort of named the songs that something that like to me fit the vibe, or like meant something about like how the song was written, or something that was, important to me at that time. And I think now on the newer songs, I'm leaning a little bit more to the first camp, where you're sort of like name the song something that that the listener will like tangibly pick up from the song, and they'll probably think that's the name of the song anyway. So so like, help them find it better later, so less artistic, more strategic. But
okay, great, nice to know. I can't wait for what's coming out, because I know it's going to be great as always. Earl, thanks so much for coming to the sanctuary. I have one more question. I'm lying. I don't have all right, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Israel. It was great being in the sanctuary. Earl Donald here. Happy to be here.